Liberate IT is an Oracle NetSuite solution provider that has been servicing Australian and New Zealand companies since 2011.
Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to the latest in our webinar series for 2021, the latest and the last. So welcome, I am Andrew Liniger. I'm the Relationship Manager for Liberate IT. It's great to have been hosting these webinars for this year. I'm going to give you a few updates around the ground. So our data center migration for all NetSuite customers is happening. There's a due date of around October next year to have all those completed. That's where we're going from the US data centers to Australia. So far, when they do happen, they're going very smoothly and successfully, which is great. I know that there are a few stop-starts with some of our customers, which can be a bit frustrating as you're trying to get everything ready for those. But if you don't know about that, haven't been impacted by that, NetSuite will send you some in-application notifications around that so that you know exactly when it's happening. Did you know NetSuite have recently acquired 27,000 customers globally? So yes, that's very good for NetSuite, but also good to know that you're in good company, that the NetSuite solution is growing and improving and enhancing, and from all the customers globally, they're getting more and more experience on how to improve that product so that you get more out of it. So that's good news all round. Suite Commerce Standard is something that's coming in 2022. Right now, we think it's around March. So that's a connected website, which is far simpler than Suite Commerce Advanced. So if you're thinking about a B2B portal, for example, to complement your existing website, hey, you and I need to chat early next year. I thought I would do a recap of webinars, given that this is the last one for 2021. And so I might just give you a recap of all the things that we've been talking to you about for the last 10 months or so. So in February, we had some new release test planning. That's always helpful. We went through the 21.1 upgrade and all the new features that came about then. I had Brett come along and talk about the supply allocation engine and getting the most out of that. That's if you've got advanced inventory, which pretty much every customer has, then that is something that you already have. And come and talk to me if you feel like you need to get more out of that. I had the support crew come in and talk about optimizing dashboards. We then also, I did a quick session on all the NetSuite modules that NetSuite have available. And then I got the crew in from NetSuite to talk about WMS, or warehouse management. So that's all the barcode scanning there. Then we had a user event in September where we talked about the 21.2 release and all that's in there. Here we are talking about all things manufacturing, which is very exciting. That's just our ones. And then we also had some Suite app providers come in and share their wares with you. All of that can be found on our YouTube channel, all our resources page of our website. Recently changed our landing page of our website. Go check it out. It looks pretty cool, but not too dissimilar to what we had before. Some housekeeping for today before I kick off. I'm currently recording this session so that we can post it on YouTube. If you've got any questions for Lasse as we go through the webinar today, please put that in the Q&A box and not chat. I'll be keeping an eye out for your questions as you think of them and they come up. I'll interrupt Lasse and I'll actually read them out so that everyone's aware of the questions and get some context for that. Before I introduce Lasse, I always like to introduce Brett McKay. He's our optimization manager. As always, every month I say, hey, go and use Brett where you can. He's got a lot of experience in manufacturing and distribution systems and supply chain skills. I know supply chains are quite challenging at the moment. So he's a free service to utilize in the business. Really encourage you to reach out to me and we can line up a session for you free of charge. Okay, so here we are, NetSuite Manufacturing with our manufacturing expert, Lasse. And mate, good to have you. and I can't wait to hear what you've got to share for us today, mate.
Thank you. Well, let me just show you what I have to share with you guys today. That one there. Yep, IT is hard. All right, so here we go. I'm just gonna kill my camera. All right, so welcome, guys. Some of you may have heard this spiel before, some of you may not have. We figured we'll give you a bit of a rundown of NetSuite manufacturing. Manufacturing is a lot of things, and it means different things to different people. But what we'll try and cover today is sort of what are the prerequisites? What do you need to do? So basic assembly items, we need some BOMs, we need to do work orders, and then we need to build the product. Then we'll move in towards work in progress and routing, work center, sort of a bit more cost capture specific manufacturing with steps and work centers. I wouldn't call it advanced manufacturing because there's a separate module for that, but using routes and work centers and scheduling. And we'll have a look at how that works in practice inside of NetSuite, and then we'll move towards manufacturing mobile, which I think a lot of you guys may not have seen before. It is relatively new to NetSuite. It's been around for around 2 years, but it's finally gotten to a point where we're happy recommending it and using it. So some of you guys may not use NetSuite. To you, some of the lingo may be a little bit confusing. Just ask questions if you have. For some of you, you might be on normal assembly build backflushing already. You want to do WIP, then it's for you. And some of you guys maybe you just want to know how manufacturing is handled in NetSuite. Feel free to ask questions along the way. So what I wanted to do first is move my Zoom bar because it's in the way. That's better. So what we've got on the left-hand side of the screen here is just the standard item types in NetSuite. And if you're familiar with NetSuite, you would have seen that before. But we need assembly items to manufacture anything. That's the core. Then we typically use inventory items for our componentry. So if you want to manage a count of inventory on hand, you'll use inventory. Or we can use non-inventory items for your perishables and things that you don't want to track, such as rubber gloves or plastic bags or whatever it may be. You won't have a stock on hand. And service or other charge items for covering overheads, such as labor charges, machining overheads, and things like that. Now, we'll go into how we do that a bit later. But this is looking at an assembly item in NetSuite on the header. It's got a name. So today we're gonna build a blind. I made up a blind because hey, there's a few steps and there's different things to do. But I wanted to highlight the unit types on the right-hand side. So what NetSuite lets you do, it lets you consume in a unit of measure that is different from your stock purchase and selling unit. And this was not always the case. So if you've been with NetSuite for a long time, maybe this is a surprise, maybe it isn't, but you can purchase products. So like componentry, for example, or manufacturing of sub-assemblies, you can purchase them in bags of 1,000 and you can consume them in eaches or bundles of 10 or whatever you want. But we do have the option to tweak the unit of measure between the purpose that we're doing between the transactions. All right, so on the assembly, we can go to the manufacturing sub-tab, and down here we have some bill of materials. And this is, some people call these recipes, some people call them BOMs, which is short for bill of material. Other people call it an inventory sub-list. If you've worked with NetSuite for a while, you may have what I like to call legacy BOMs, where there was a sub-list under the purchasing and inventory sub-tab, which is that one here. Again, no one will be using this. So any new clients doing manufacturing will be using advanced bill of materials. It's easy to convert over, and hence I've chosen to use that as an example today. Every assembly will have at least one BOM and must have one revision. And you'll notice there's multiple BOMs here. Now, why is that, lads? We have multiple BOMs, so what's up with that? So we can have a bill of material per location. Now, why is that beneficial? So let's say you have multiple manufacturing environments, and in one environment, you source your M4 nuts from a particular local provider, and in your other location, could be South Island, could be another country, could be Australia, New Zealand, what have we, you may have a different local supplier for a similar product that can be substituted, in which case you would want to have different bill of materials for the same assembly to be reflected when we manufacture this product at said locations. So that's one of the reasons that you can have multiple BOMs. You could have a scenario where you have a standard BOM that you typically build. Customers may request a longer sleeve on a jersey or a different color on a product or whatever slight variation it may be. You do have the option to have multiple BOMs against the same assembly. And then when we raise a work order to manufacture a product, we can, from a drop-down list, we can quickly select that particular BOM that we want to use. The BOM itself looks like this. So a BOM is a record in NetSuite. And as you can see here, what we can do is we can make it available for all locations. We can restrict it for location. We can set what subsidiary it's related to, and we can tag it against a particular assembly. So any given BOM can be used across multiple items. So in case of matrix item manufacturing, we use this quite a lot, but in most cases, I recommend we have one BOM per product, but in a many-to-one relationship, so we can have multiple BOMs to one product, but each BOM, as a rule of thumb, is to be linked to one specific assembly, unless it makes sense to do otherwise. On the BOM itself, we can take component yield. What this does is, we'll have a look at that when we look at the revision. So we'll just fire that one in there. So if I use component yield, you'll notice on the revision down here, which is the sublist, it's at 100% by default. So this is used in cases where, let's say I have to issue 100 kilos of a particular powder, but I'm aware that there's usually a little bit of spilling on the floor, or for whatever reason, my yield isn't quite 100%. So my yield could be 95%. And if I was to put 95% yield on my revision component sublist, then when we go to issue components, NetSuite will automatically update the quantity over here. So the BOM quantity could be 1, but I would have to issue 1.05 or whatever the conversion is. I'm not that good at math. So the revision is your recipe, your component sublist if you want. The bill of material is just a reference that links the revision to the particular assembly at a given location in a subsidiary. So that's the link. We've got the assembly, we've got the bill of material, and underneath the bill of material, we have the revision. Now, the revision itself is the sublist. It's what holds all the details that we need to manufacture. So when we go ahead and try to do a work order shortly in here, we're going to source this revision, and NetSuite is automatically going to source all of these components down here. So for those that aren't familiar with NetSuite, these are just component sublists. They could be inventory items, they could be assembly, they could be non-inventory items. We can pretty much put whatever we want on there. You'll notice that the one I have down the bottom says labor. What's labor? So this first example is what we need to do basic manufacturing. We're not using WIP at this stage. We're not using any routing or work centers. We're just going to build a product with backflush. Now, in that case, the way that overhead is typically captured is by adding service or other charge items onto the revision, like I've done here. So what I've said is, to build one of these, I need one charge of labor. So what I have there is just a reference from this particular service item, where I've set the purchase price for this service item to be $43.08. So now when I go to manufacture this product, whenever I complete one, it's automatically going to allocate $43.08 for labor as an overhead to the expense account that I've allocated to that particular service item. Again, this is really up to your finance and accounting team, what accounts they want to use to capture the overheads against, but this is typically how it's done in the most basic fashion. I did want to show one thing before I open up all of this. So you'll notice I've got effective start and end dates here. And so I've got revision 1 and revision 2. So what's that about? So NetSuite lets us manage revisions by effective start and end date. So if I was to manufacture something today because it's the 16th, NetSuite would automatically use this particular revision. Now, if I'd done it before, I would have used the old revision, but this is so that you can manage a revision of your component sublist, of your revisions. You can set future dates on effective revisions as well, but only one revision can be active at any given date. So by that, I mean, let's say we've decided to change our paint supplier or some provider, and we know that from February, we're going to start using up a different product. It's the same, a different component. It's the same product that we're building. The process is the same, but you can now create a new revision and have it start on the 1st of February. And then when we get to the 1st of February, we release a work order for said assembly. It will automatically source the revision that matches that date, which is pretty cool. Another thing that we can do, I won't show you the functionality today, but there is a engineering change control, engineering change request framework in NetSuite. There's no extra charge associated with this. It's part of the supply chain management bundle. So there's a full-fledged ECR module in here, which means we can lock down who can make changes to revisions and BOMs. So you can request a particular change to a revision. That request goes via an approval workflow to a engineering manager. He can then approve or decline. If he approves it, he can then push it out to the BOMs and revisions affected, and then that will take effect throughout the system. Again, something that is, I think we had that for about 2 years now, but relatively new and something that was missing. So if you need that, I would highly encourage you to use that. You may be manufacturing already. It's a good way to just get around the issue of, oh no, someone changed the BOM because we didn't have enough product, and then they forget. And then the whole supply and demand planning goes out the window because someone chose the wrong product. I'm sure some of you have been there. I know I have, and we want to avoid that. And that's really what engineering change request functionality is good for. All right, so a work order. A work order in NetSuite is an intent to manufacture a product at a given date in the future. It's not building the product itself, that's an assembly build. But what we have here is we have a work order. So I want to build my blind. I want to do it at my location Liberate. And it has already automatically sourced the BOM that we had on the product before and the revision, because this was my default revision against this location. I can set a start and an end date. In this particular instance, it's not overly important, but we can manage that as well. So what happens when we create the work order, we choose the assembly, NetSuite automatically populates the sublist with what was on the revision. So the revision that we just saw before, this one here, essentially what happens is when we raise a work order, it sources those particular items. It will say how many products are required to manufacture whatever the quantity is up here. I've just made one, but if it was 3, then this would all be multiplied by 3. Because the work order is released, NetSuite has gone ahead and committed the stock. Now, if I did not have enough stock, the back order column would have a quantity in it. In this case, there's plenty of stock, so we can go ahead and manufacture. One of the other things I did want to just highlight is in the revision itself, you have an option on a line level to tell the system how you want to source the products on this particular revision. Now, in this case, they all say stock, which means let's just pull it off the shelf when we build this. However, in the case of products that can be purchased, you can change this to be purchased. And what happens when we release the work order for a product that has a component which item source is set as purchase, it will automatically generate a purchase order against the preferred vendor tagged as the vendor of choice on said component item. So this is really cool. If you're running a lean system, you're trying to do just in time, certain products you may only ever really want to order the componentry when there's an order that has been placed in the system. If that's what you do, this is the way to do that. So you could change that to the item source could be purchase. We're not doing that in this case, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that that's an option. The other thing that we can do on work orders, it's not happening in this case. Any one of these items that we have here could be an assembly in its own right? So it could be a sub-assembly or a child assembly. There's no limitation on how many levels deep you can go. I think that the furthest I've ever gotten is about 6 levels deep. But to my knowledge, there's no limitation there outside of what you can manage, right? Because it does get hairy when you have, the deeper it gets, the more you need to manage. When using sub-assemblies, there's another feature that NetSuite Options offers, which is called using a sub-assembly as a phantom BOM. So in the case here, again, I haven't created one because it gets a bit more convoluted, but let's say that this DBW2000 was an assembly in its own right. In this case, we're just going to pick it off the shelf, assuming we have one manufactured already. If we were to want to manufacture that as a phantom sub-assembly, what would happen is this particular sub-assembly here would be exploded onto our components sublist, and all the components you needed to create that sub-assembly would be exposed on the work order item sublist itself, and you would then be able to manufacture the sub-assembly and the parent assembly in one go. Sometimes this is very useful, other times it isn't. Let's say you have a product with a very, very short half-life, for example, and you don't want to mix it because once you mix it, there's a half-life that goes into effect, so you can't have it sitting on a shelf, right? So that's a good example. You may mix certain paints that issues happen over time if they're not applied immediately to the product against which it needs to be painted on, things like that. So NetSuite does support this as well, but we're not going to go into that today because then we need a lot more than an hour to talk. All right, so there's a manufacturing mobile tab on the work order as well, and I just want to bring it up here. So there's two options there. There's backflush and there's real time. So what backflush means is if and when we were to use manufacturing mobile to manufacture this particular work order and backflush is ticked, NetSuite will automatically consume the components for us as we manufacture the product. There's no issuing required. Issuing and completing happens in one go. The real-time tick box is an option to have. Let's say I manufacture it in mobile and I hit completed, which we'll have a look at later. It will push the work order completion into NetSuite, and the record will be generated inside of NetSuite. We'll have a look at what that looks like a little bit later. But you do have the option to turn off real time. In some environments, you may have a lot of people on the floor, and you might have a manufacturing or floor manager who wants to confirm that this has been done properly before we push the work order completions into NetSuite. So there's quite a lot of flexibility around that. All right, so what we need to do is we need to create an assembly build. So what I did here is on the work order, I hit create build, and it takes me to an assembly build. And this is really the most basic way to manufacture anything in NetSuite. It is backflush, native backflush if you want. There's no other option. What do I mean by backflush? I mean that the assembly build will automatically take the componentry that is required as per the work order itself. Here's the quantity we need. I go to create my assembly build, and the quantity has automatically been taken out of stock on this assembly build. So that is what we mean when we say backflush in a NetSuite context. So I'm building one. This is my assembly build. That's really all we need to do to build that. We can go and have a look on the GL impact of this particular assembly build, and you will notice that each individual component has been credited to my stock on hand account, as has my labor charges. Remember before, 1 hour of labor was worth $43.08. Well, that has automatically been credited to my COGS account. Whether it needs to be COGS account or not, it's up to you to decide, but it is in this particular example. And all of the value of this is what it has cost us to make the product, and that's what we've debited into our stock on hand account. So this is now the value of our blind one that we have built. Again, these numbers are all arbitrary. I just came up with them, but for the context of showing this, that should be all right. And then we go back to the work order, which is a separate transaction. So in NetSuite, everything is transactions, and it's important to understand that a work order is a transaction, and an assembly build is a separate transaction that is raised from the work order, and then we go back to the work order again, and now the status says build. So NetSuite handles WIP and non-WIP work orders very, very differently. So if you just use standard NetSuite, once you build it, it says build, that's it. There's really nothing more that you have to do. The stock is now available and on hand, and someone can sell it or transfer it somewhere or use it in another work order, whatever we need to do. This was really sort of very basic standard NetSuite manufacturing in a nutshell quickly. And any questions around this, or otherwise I'll move on to WIP manufacturing. But if there's anything specific to this, I'm happy to answer some of those.
No questions yet, man.
Okay.
Even for someone like me that's, I guess, spent a life in services industries, I kind of understand, which is great. That's saying something. So I'm not surprised there's no questions, man. You're doing great.
Cool. Good stuff. All right. Well, let me add a question of my own, though. So one of the things is what we're looking at here is I haven't used bins, and I haven't used lots or serial numbers in this example. That's not to say that we can't do that. So if you're familiar with NetSuite, you know that bins are supported, lot numbers are supported, as are serial numbers. Again, what happens is when we do the work order completion, if you use, the work order build, if you use lot control components or inventory, serialized inventory, you would have to indicate the serial numbers or the lots and the quantities that you have consumed, just like when you fulfill or receive products that are either serialized or lot controlled. But the process is...
I'm gonna interrupt. I do have a question.
Yep.
Now, I must admit it's on chat and not Q&A, but the question is, can we not use assembly builds, just change a work order to build? I'm not sure.
Hold on, I'll just have a look at the chat. I'll put it over here. Can we not use assembly builds, just change a work order to build? Seems like a lot of transactions. No, you cannot. And so the reason for that is, and let's just, I'm going forward now. So if we go back to the work order, so the understanding the difference between and the need for multiple transactions is important. So now, let me stop myself there. Yes, you can go straight to a work order build. You do not have to raise a work order. So if you just want to build a product, you can just go straight ahead and do an assembly build. You do not need a work order for this. So I think that's what the answer is to that question. However, if you decide to create a work order first, you have to do an assembly build to build your whatever you intend to build. Hopefully that makes sense. So yes, we can just do a build. We can just do one of these. We don't need a work order. But the reason for typically creating work orders is if you need to plan your flow in the future, you have a certain, you have capacity restraints. Maybe if we have a sales order for a particular product, we can raise the work order from the sales order line level. So now manufacturing team knows that this work order is for this customer, is for this sales order, and then they go ahead and build it. So there's a lot of benefits there. But you're absolutely right. No, you do not have to raise a work order first, not at all.
Thanks, man. Simon's happy with that.
Sweet. Very good question, because I completely missed that. Sorry. So I was just so used to releasing those work orders. It's a lot of it is obviously about managing your workload, and you can do that with work orders where the assembly builds is an instant happening. But yeah, very, very good question. Thank you. All right, let's move on to WIP and routing manufacturing prerequisites. So when we start manufacturing using work in progress or WIP accounting, and I want to stress that this is very much about the accounting impact. I've dealt with a lot of clients that call normal manufacturing WIP, and it gets confusing. Now, from a NetSuite point of view, WIP means we're using a WIP account. We will be issuing components on the floor. As soon as we issue them, they would go out of your inventory on hand balance, and it'll go in and it'll sit on your WIP account until such time as we complete and finish the product, when it'll be converted to the finished product and go back into inventory balance on hand. It also means that we can capture some WIP cost variance balances and things like that, which I'll cover when we go through this. But it is very much about the accounting impact of manufacturing and capturing costs associated with the manufacturer on a much more granular level. So what we saw before was we had a revision, and I had just one line that said labor. One of those was $48 and $43, whatever it was, which is very, very basic. Now, once we get to WIP, we can manage this in a more granular fashion. In order to be able to do that, we have to create what's called a manufacturing cost template. So this particular cost template I've created here, I've put in the particular service items that I want to use to capture machine runtime, labor runtime, and machine setup costs. This is not an exhaustive list. So when we capture costs associated with manufacturing in a WIP process in NetSuite, we can capture machine run costs, setup costs, overheads, that we can do the same for labor. We can have other costs. So you can, your finance team can go absolutely nuts with this, and be careful to let them do too much, because you got to manage it, right? But you really have a lot of options to capture that. So what the manufacturing cost template does is it sets the standard rates to be used for your run cost, your setup cost, etc. Now, why is this important? It's important because, again, we may have multiple different manufacturing environments where our cost scenarios are different. So labor might not always be $18. It could be $10. It could be 4 cents. It could be $40, depending on what you're doing. And we need these manufacturing cost templates once we build our routings and set up our work centers. The items themselves are quite similar to the labor cost that I showed earlier. It's a service item with a particular rate that then gets applied and used when we generate a GL impact during manufacturing. We need to create work centers, right? So because this is WIP and routing. In saying that, you can manufacture WIP in NetSuite without using routing. So I want to make that very, very clear. So if you're interested in simply issuing components so that they go into your WIP account, and then manufacturing using an assembly build and closing your work order, you most certainly can. So routing and work centers are optional. You do not have to use routing in an advanced level. But most people that go to the trouble of using WIP will also use routing and manufacturing, because there's quite a synergy there. Now, to use routing, we need to set up the work centers, and I have an example of a work center here. So what is a work center? A work center is a virtual representation of an area or a line or whatever it may be on your floor or part of your manufacturing process. So for every work center, we can assign manufacturing tasks. And this will be clearer once we go and have a look at the example of a route later. But in many cases, you could have a prep room, you could have a product issue room, you may have a paint area, you may have an assembly room, workshop, whatever. Those different areas that have different parameters associated with them. And what do I mean by parameters? So every work center must have a number of labor resources and machine resources. You do not have to have either one or the other, but if you want to capture cost, it needs to. So what do these do? So this is my fabric cutting work center. Again, we're gonna build a blind, and you'll see how we do that. But at this particular work center, I have one resource at any given time. So now NetSuite knows when I apply my cost template and I spent some time at this fabric cutting center, I have one resource and I will know what the cost is. So, and if I had machine resources, the reason for this is I can now capture my machine runtime, overheads, setup time, etc. So that's what they do. Another thing is you'll notice there's a work calendar down here. So what does that do? So every work center is associated with a work calendar. And again, this becomes more important when you get into scheduling and looking at the capacity on your floor, but it is important nonetheless. So what I've done in this case here is I've said, hey, this is my classic work calendar. My work hours are 8 hours a day, and I start at 6:30 Monday to Friday. I don't work on the weekend. Now, you could have certain specialist areas where your staff is only available 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever it may be, and maybe they only work 4 hours. Well, if that's the case, make a work center for that, create a calendar that is specific to that, and then when we do the scheduling and the planning, NetSuite knows when there is capacity available. We can also set non-working days, right? So I put ho, ho, ho in here because it's almost Christmas, which isn't a public New Zealand in a public holiday in New Zealand, which I find very strange. But anyway, maybe it's too hot. We can do that as well, right? So this is where you would put all your standard public holidays, or if you have any days that you knew that a particular work center wouldn't be working. So setting all of this up is part of making sure that you can run your RIP and your routing manufacturing properly. All right, so what are these routes that I'm talking about? Let me just see, there's no questions at this stage. Okay, I'll keep talking. So a manufacturing route is, well, it needs to have a name, as you can see I've got here, but a route is very much the steps required, where they will be carried out, how long time it takes, and what the cost impact is going to be. So this is my my routing for building this particular blind that I have here. You'll notice there's operational sequences. So I put 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. What this route says is, in order for me to build this particular blind, I need to cut the fabric to a certain length. I'm going to do this at my fabric cutting work center, and I'm going to do this using this particular manufacturing cost template. Now, as we saw before, this particular work center here had 1 labor resource and 0 machine resources. That's just been sourced automatically when we select the work center. Now I've allocated my manufacturing cost template, so now NetSuite knows what service items to use to capture my overheads. And then what we need to set is, what is the setup time and what is the run rate? I've left setup time at 0 here, but it could be whatever. So what's setup time? So setup time is pretty much what the word is. So what it means, I like to use the reference, like when you set up a new jig, you have to set up the jig, right? So if you're doing extrusion molding or anything like that, setting up your jig or anything else, there may be setup time involved. So that setup time is one thing. You can charge the hours for that separately. Then you've got your run rate. The run rate is how many minutes do I need at this particular workstation to manufacture my part of the process to make one product. So that's the run rate. So each one of these, I've put a different run rate. I haven't put any setup time, but we certainly could if that was required. We can also manage lag. Again, I haven't put any lag on this one here, but we can tell the system to only proceed to step number 2 once we're done with step number 1. Only proceed to step number 2 when we've completed 50% of step number 1 in a quantity, or when we've completed 50% of the time required to do step number 1. So we do have the ability to manage whether operational tasks can be run in parallel or whether they have to be in sequence. So there's a lot of tools that we can use in here. For the purpose of this, I haven't put any specific lag in here. You do have the option to auto calculate lag as well, which NetSuite will follow a subset of rules that you can set up how to do the routing. A lot of businesses simply just, do one step, the next, and that finishes it. But there are options to use advanced lag calculations and have that reflect on your lead time, because this is really all about the lead time. How long time does it take for me to make 5,000 of this particular product? That changes a lot whether we're running in parallel, whether we've got a lag or not. So that's really where this becomes beneficial. So if you're using more advanced supply and demand planning, which we won't go into today, it will automatically source the lead time based on lag and things like that in here on your work order when it's planning for component requirements. So that's what the routing looks like. Do this, do this, do this, do this, and do this, and then we're done. and here's the time that it takes to do that. Now, one of the things that you can do as well is you can capture components per operation. So hey, well, what does that mean? Well, what we can do is we can say by each step, I want to issue some of the components. So these components here, you'll notice they're exactly what we had on our revision before. So when I build a route, I can tell NetSuite, well, at step number 1, I just need these blackout white left ones. At step number 2, I need the tube, but I also need the rail cutting down here. Step number 3, I don't have to do anything because that's just assembly. Step number 4, I need to fit a chain. So here's this chain. Step number 5, where I add brackets and a box. Well, I need some of these particular brackets. Now, I want to just highlight this because it means when we do operational steps on the floor, whether we use NetSuite to do it or whether we do it using mobile, this will let us consume and backflush on a step-by-step basis. Again, this is important if you're running a just-in-time environment where you're trying to keep your stock to a minimum. You may have a short lead time. Sometimes work orders can take weeks, right? I do have clients that manufacture very large industrial equipment, and it can take a week to do a particular work order. If that's the case, or 2 weeks, you don't necessarily want to issue your components until you get to the step when you actually need it. But again, this really depends on your supply chain vertical, but the options are there, and I just wanted to show you that as well. Here's a little bit of a bonus feature. So this is what's called the task scheduler in NetSuite. So when we use WIP and routing in NetSuite, we get a task scheduler overview. So the work order that we're about to release, but here it's already been released, we'll see step 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 down here across the different work centers. In here, I can drag and drop the different operational steps between work centers. Now, why is this beneficial? Now, let's say you have 3 or 4 lines. There's a lot of load on line number 4 because they're busy with an order for X. Maybe you move some of your work orders to another line, so you can move them around. In our example here, every workstation has a different purpose, except for A and B, right? So we could possibly move these around. But I just wanted to highlight that you do have that option to get a visibility of your capacity on the floor in this fashion. All of these blocks here are green. However, if I was to release a lot of work orders today and I reached my 8-hour capacity on my fabric cutting work center, remember we had a calendar, we had an 8-hour workday. We put in how long time it takes to do a step. If I filled this up with hundreds of work orders today, this bar here would turn red once I'm above capacity. So this is a really great tool for guys planning the floor, whether you plan a day ahead or a week ahead, I don't know. The intent for this is for planners to have a tool so they can plan what's happening on the floor. I talk too much, I'm excited and I don't have that much time, so I'm gonna run over this, but hey, this is cool. I wanted to show you that one as well. So here is a work order. So now we have a WIP and routing work order. You notice that it's got a tick in WIP in here. There's the manufacturing routing itself, which we didn't have before when we just did a basic one. Bill of material, revision, everything else is the same. Scheduling here says backward, production start and end date. Items, you'll notice that labor isn't there because I've used another BOM. We don't want to charge basic overheads here. How are we going to capture overheads? We're going to use that on the different routing steps that we utilize per the cost templates. Now we can see the operations, right? So the operations I had on my routing record before has been sucked in here. So on the work order, not only can I see the items required, I can see those 5 different steps that we've done in the route. And I can see when NetSuite thinks I need to start them and when I will be done doing them. We can look at plant time and other areas as well. Now, the way to use WIP in NetSuite is we need to issue the components. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to issue the components. So that's what's called a work order issue. Again, in order to do this, we need to have a work order because the work order is the core that manages the WIP process. First off, we hit issue components and now we issue the components. So This is where it takes the components out that I need for steps 10, 20, 20, 40, and 50. And I'm just going to issue all of them in one go. We could issue at every single step if we wanted to, but in this case, I've just issued everything up front. So now all the goods have gone out of inventory. If I look at my deal impact on this particular work order issue, you'll notice that all my inventory has been credited to the stock on hand account. It's been debited into my WIP account, right? So this is the WIP account. So now the value on your balance sheet sits in your WIP account and not in your inventory stock on hand account, which is the whole purpose of running WIP manufacturing. Also, it stops anyone else from using these items. They cannot be committed, they cannot be transferred, they cannot be sold. Once components are issued, they are never going back. And this is important to understand. If you overissue, they will not come back, right? So you issue what you issue. You can issue as many times as you want, but if you overissue, it will automatically be consumed when you close off the work order. So that's important to understand. Now, the next step that we need to do is we've issued the components. Now we can either enter completion or we can enter completion with backflush. In this case, we're going to enter completion because we've already issued the components. Now the scenario where, hey Lars, I just want to do all of this because I've already done it. What do I do? Then you hit enter completion with backflush. Then you can complete all your operational sequences in one go. You can issue all the components and you can build it. So there is that option. But what we're doing here is we're trying to mimic what we might be doing on the floor. So we issue the components, we have a look at the deal impact, and next up we do a work order completion. So what is a work order completion? Well, this is me telling the system that, hey, I've started at operation 10 and I've ended at operation 50 and I've done one. So in this example, I'm doing all 5 of them in one go because I only have an hour, and if I have to do all 5, I would be talking too long. But you can do step 10, step 20, step 30, step 40, step 50, however many steps you have. When you complete the last step, that is when the finished good gets turned into a product that sits on hand, and the value in your WIP account gets pushed into stock on hand as well. So in this case, we've done all steps in one go, and down here you can see how much time I've done. NetSuite has calculated this for me automatically based on my routing, how much time I required. You can edit these down here on the fly as you go. So if your operators realized, hey, I've spent 30 minutes instead of 10, you could edit those and the deal impact would be reflected accordingly. So we have a look at the deal impact here, right? So it's taken the products that we had in here before, if I can find them, all my salary and wages. It's taken all those different steps because we're just completing all of our different steps. And then I'm taking what was in the WIP account as well, and I'm putting it back into stock on hand. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're consuming the products that we put in there, and we're consuming all the labor associated down here in one go because we're completing that off. But we're not done yet, right? And this is really the key. And a lot of customers that are used to using standard assembly builds, they want to use WIP and routing, they start doing it and they forget to close their work orders. And I cannot stress enough how bad that is. So when we use WIP, we have to close off the work order, because what happens is, as you'll see here, there's a deal impact, which shows exactly what has happened throughout the whole WIP process. Now, if we simply manufacture a product and we close it off and we do the WIP close, there is no WIP variance that needs to be posted. But what can happen is you may have a large work order for 1,000 products. That work order is open for a week. On Monday, we've manufactured 100 of them. On Tuesday, we sell the 100 and we keep manufacturing. So you may end up in a scenario where you've shipped and sold some of your goods before you've closed off your work order. So there may be a variance posted against your WIP account. And that only gets posted when you close your work order. So that's really important to do that last one. So once we've closed that one, the work order status says closed. And this is what you want when you're done. A WIP work order must be closed off. Issue, consume, close. You can issue as much as you want. You can consume and create as much as you want. And when you're done with all that, you can close it off. But that is required to do with manufacturing.
Hey, Les, I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying we need to close the work order when we're done?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes. That's what I'm saying.
Hey, can I ask a couple of questions from Simon?
Yes, I'm just reading them. How do you handle downtime? Do you schedule to 100% of time, or say 80% to allow for downtime, or would you allow for this time in the minutes per operation? Yeah, that's a really good question. So what I do in a lot of cases is, in the steps in between, I may put some setup time in there. If you know you have downtime between steps 1 and 2, and if you don't want to capture that as an actual expense, you can have 20 minutes against an item that has no cost impact. So there's quite a lot of ways of doing that, Simon, depending on the process. Typically, when we set this up, we would help you with, well, how do we design the routings? Because it's a good question, and it is important to design this so that it reflects what actually happens on the floor in the context of how much do you want to assign a value that eventually becomes part of the cost of the product, and how much is just downtime where people might be doing something else where they're effective. Does each operator have to have a NetSuite login to complete a work order or put their times in? If they use, so what we're doing here is the native NetSuite UI in either, could be in a browser, on a PC, on a tablet, typically a terminal on the floor. Then yes, you would need a full license. To use mobile, no. There's mobile licenses that are separate, and those licenses are cheaper.
And yeah, a lot cheaper.
Yeah. So we will have a look at that. I'm just talking too much as usual. It's another question from Johan. Can we see lead times per product as set up in the manufacturing routing in the form of a report, or is it a matter of setting up a custom NetSuite report to do this? Yeah, so that's a good question. If you're familiar with NetSuite, we've got safe searches, but the analytics workbook also supports all transactions in relation to manufacturing in NetSuite. So there are, in SuiteSuccess and NetSuite now, there's a lot of reports out of the box, but we can also build those. So you do have the option to do more advanced joins using the analytical workbook than just using a simple safe search. Generally, I think it's a good idea for your accounting team and your finance team versus your operational team on the floor to constantly monitor the variance between what we think should happen and what's actually happening. And those reports can help with that. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question. All right, this was very quick. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just quickly show you another feature here. So we can, this is the standard NetSuite Traveler, right? So, and this can be used in conjunction with mobile, which we'll have a look at in a second. So this is the work order we just saw. I can print this Traveler. I can use it in conjunction with mobile, or I can use it to write stuff on hand and someone else can enter into NetSuite once I've done the completion steps. But basically, you can scan the product, you can scan the work order, you can scan your operational steps, and then you can go ahead and complete those. Or you can use it to write up. But again, standard NetSuite, it just comes out of the box, and we can print these, which is quite handy. We can customize this as well if we wanted to look a different way. All right, so I'm probably going to run over this relatively quickly because we're close to getting to the end of this, but I just wanted to show you how this works in mobile. We've seen now what it looks like using the native NetSuite interface, and this is what it looks like in mobile. So first off, we're going to do just a standard assembly build. So I log into my mobile. So this is just a copy from a screen that you can run on your handheld, and I need to say what work center am I working on. So when we manufacture just standard work orders, we need to allocate just one work center. In routing, we have multiple, but for the purpose of just basic backflushing, we just have one. So I log into my assembly and I hit start resume work. When I've done that, now I get to choose, hey, Lars, which work order would you like to work on? In this case, I think I'm going to work on work order number 311. It says assembly blind, production, end my work. Yep, I'd like to do that. I'm entering the quantity of 1 in here. manufactured one. There really isn't a lot to do here because we're just building and backflushing. There's no steps. I'm just saying, yes, I have built my blind against this work order, and that's it, I'm done. When this happens, it automatically creates the work order build in the backend in NetSuite in a backflush fashion, takes the stock out, puts the stock back in. So really, it's just a very simple way for your operators on the floor to say, here's the work order, I've done it, how many have I done? Boom, done, that's it. You don't have to log in, you don't have to do anything. And these licenses are, as Andrew just mentioned, quite cheaper as well. That one there, done with that. And when we go back, we can see now that 311 is gone, right? Because I built it, there's no more to do. And then I can keep working. Now, in WIP, it's a little bit different, right? Because now I'll be working at my particular work center, and every work center will have tasks associated with that work center. So we'll go ahead and I'll select the fabric cutting one. I can start work and I'll pick a work order, in this case, 310. Now you'll notice we can see our operational name. We can see the assembly and the work order. So it's a little bit different because I'm at step number 1, right? And then I want to say outstanding work order quantity is 1. So in this case, I'm backflushing, which means I'm not telling NetSuite what components I need from step 1 to 1. Because remember, when we set up the routing, we had already told NetSuite which components were required for each operation. So that happens automatically in the background. If we wanted to, we could not backflush, and you could manually choose the products that you use at each step. But in this case, I'm just backflushing straightforward, and then I'm done with that particular step. That was a very quick rundown. But again, I also wanted to show the difference between doing it in NetSuite and doing it in mobile, because the mobile is a whole lot faster and more intuitive. However, it requires a lot of setup in the background for this to work properly. I think, Andrew, that's me talking. Can QR codes be used instead of barcodes? That's a good question that I don't think we're there yet. I know it's been worked on. I know it's been worked on in a WMS context yet. I don't have the answer to that one. So let me get back to you on that one, Johan. I'm not 100% sure.
But NetSuite would print the traditional barcode on the traveler, right? So
yeah.
And
so
it contains all the information you actually
yeah.
need. So a QR code probably wouldn't give you additional benefit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we could always customize it, because all of this is available to be customized if we wanted to. But yeah, my answer would probably be just use the barcodes. But QR codes, we can also trigger and print it. So if we want to have on manufacturing completion, we can trigger printing of QR codes, for example, if it's something required by your customers. There's a lot of customization and workflows that we can do around this. So this is just the standard out of the box functionality.
That's great, man. Hey, we've covered off a lot here around, hey, if you're manufacturing yourself, but what if you've got outsourced manufacturing?
Yeah, so outsourced manufacturing is, you can manage that in NetSuite as well. Obviously, you won't be using mobile for outsourced manufacturing, but there is a module in NetSuite to manage outsourced manufacturing. So we don't have to do routings, obviously, but the BOMs will be set up to be at a location that is outsourced. And then we can manage the purchase order and work order relationship between the two, so that when we raise a work order that is outsourced, we have a special service item to charge for what we know we need to pay them to build a product. When we receive the product back in, we automatically receive it and build a work order at the 3PL location or third-party manufacturing location in one go. So there's quite an advanced module to manage that, and it comes as part of standard NetSuite as well. I can see Andrew has a question for me about, can the mobile app handle NetSuite tasks to say completed? So in the context of this, it can handle completion of the work order task. If we're talking about the normal tasks, then the standard NetSuite mobile would probably be a better option. Am I allowed to answer that one yet, Andrew? Am I good?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Can scheduling from the work calendar be exported in any way, i.e. web query or other format, or would using an API integration direct to an external system be necessary? So like the schedule that we had a look at before is very much just a visual representation of the individual steps against the work orders that have been released, if that's what we're looking at. Now, all of that data can be either created using a Safe Search or analytical workbooks, and we can download that, yes. You could also access it using API if you wanted to. So we can definitely, if you're thinking of getting some of that data pushed into maybe a more advanced supply planning or management tool, and you want to see what's on your floor, then yes, that's relatively easy to get a hold of.
And what about, can you use manufacturing mobile on a, say, a PC? A tablet you could, but what about on a PC? I hadn't actually ever thought of that.
Yes. So all the screen dumps you see here is on a PC. So yeah, you can open up mobile. You can open up the mobile inside of the browser itself. It's like a virtual machine if you want, or you can fire up the app on your tablet or your dedicated handheld or your iPhone or wherever you want to run it. Yeah.
Brilliant, man. That's great. And you have absolutely nailed the time limit. Well done.
All right.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Lasse. I really appreciate you sharing all that today. I have really got a much better handle of all things manufacturing in NetSuite. So really appreciate it. Good on you. Okay, so yeah, thumbs up, double thumbs up.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Look, as we wrap up, that's it for the year. As I mentioned, we're going to send out an email to all of our customers, actually, just asking, hey, is there anything that you really want to get a webinar on for next year? We're always on the lookout for topics and would much rather have a webinar on something that you're interested in rather than something that we're interested in. So please, when you see that survey come out in the next couple of weeks, please do respond to that. We'd really appreciate it. Recording of today, as I mentioned, is going on our YouTube page and our resources page. Feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be alerted to any new content. Any follow-up questions around what you've heard from Lasse today, please get in touch with me. Love to help you out. We can start exploring things together. So that's it for another fantastic year. Can't wait till 2022 and share with you a whole bunch more knowledge around NetSuite and the NetSuite ecosystem. So goodbye for now. Take care. Thanks again, Lasse. Good to see you, man.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
We hope this video gave you the information you were after. If you have any further questions, get in touch with us using the links in the description. At Liberate IT, we can provide free consulting to understand your business system requirements, understand your company growth plans, and provide free NetSuite demonstrations. For more information, visit our website.